The morning's planned test would evaluate the performance of Riley's latest fuel formulation under controlled conditions before committing to a full-scale rocket flight test. Static firing tests allowed her to identify potential problems and refine system parameters without the additional complexities and risks associated with actual launches. The test stand had been positioned in an area of the barn that provided maximum safety separation from other equipment and materials, with additional precautions including fire suppression equipment and emergency communication systems. As Riley prepared the test motor for installation on the test stand, she reflected on the isolation that characterized her pursuit of aerospace engineering in rural Kansas. The technical challenges that consumed her attention were largely incomprehensible to her family, friends, and community members who had no background in engineering or rocket science. Online forums and correspondence with other amateur rocket enthusiasts provided some intellectual connection, but Riley often felt that she was pursuing her dreams in complete isolation from anyone who truly understood the significance of her work. The complexity of hybrid rocket propulsion had required Riley to develop expertise in areas that were typically covered in graduate-level aerospace engineering courses. Combustion chemistry, fluid dynamics, materials science, and control systems engineering were subjects that few high school students encountered, and even fewer mastered to the level required for practical application. Riley's self-directed education had been driven by necessity and passion, but it had also created a gulf between her intellectual interests and those of virtually everyone in her immediate environment. The financial investments required for Riley's aerospace pursuits had grown substantially as her projects became more sophisticated. The cost of materials, components, and specialized equipment had exhausted her savings from part-time jobs and consumed the modest financial support that her parents were able to provide. Riley had become expert at finding alternative sources for expensive components, including surplus materials from aerospace contractors, educational discounts from suppliers, and creative adaptations of equipment intended for other purposes. Local perception of Riley's workshop activities remained largely unchanged despite the increasing sophistication of her projects. Most Millfield residents continued to view her rocket building as an expensive hobby that demonstrated impractical priorities and unrealistic career aspirations. The technical achievements that Riley considered her greatest accomplishments were invisible to people who lacked the background knowledge necessary to appreciate their significance. The morning test proceeded flawlessly, according to Riley's carefully developed protocols. The hybrid motor ignited smoothly and maintained stable combustion throughout the planned burn duration. Thrust and pressure measurements indicated that her fuel formulation was achieving performance characteristics that exceeded her original design specifications. Temperature monitoring confirmed that critical components remained within acceptable operating ranges despite the extreme conditions generated by the hybrid combustion process. Data analysis following the test revealed performance characteristics that surprised even Riley with their excellence. The specific impulse measurements indicated efficiency levels that approached those achieved by some professional rocket systems. The thrust-to-weight ratio demonstrated that her motor design would be capable of powering significantly larger payloads than her previous solid fuel systems had been able to handle. Most importantly, the combustion stability and controllability characteristics suggested that her hybrid system would provide the reliability necessary for more ambitious flight projects. The success of the morning's test created a sense of validation that Riley had rarely experienced during her years of independent aerospace research. For the first time, she had concrete evidence that her theoretical understanding and practical skills were capable of producing results that matched professional standards. The hybrid motor that had consumed months of her time and attention had performed exactly as her calculations had predicted, confirming that her approach to rocket design was fundamentally sound. However, the technical success of Riley's hybrid motor test also highlighted the isolation that characterized her aerospace pursuits. She had no peers with whom to share her excitement about the test results, no mentors who could appreciate the significance of her achievements, and no clear path for translating her technical accomplishments into educational or career opportunities. The gap between Riley's actual capabilities and the perceptions of her family, school, and community had never seemed wider than it did following her successful test. The remainder of the day was spent documenting test results, analyzing performance, data, and planning the next phases of her rocket development program. Riley had learned to maintain meticulous records of all her experimental work, both for her own reference and as potential evidence of her capabilities when applying for scholarships or academic programs. The documentation process was tedious but essential, requiring her to translate technical measurements and observations into formats that could be understood by people without extensive aerospace engineering backgrounds. Evening brought the usual family dinner conversation about school, work, and community activities. Riley's parents inquired about her day's workshop activities with the polite interest that characterized their approach to her aerospace pursuits. David asked technical questions that demonstrated his engineering background, while Lynn focused on safety considerations and the practical implications of Riley's continued investment in rocket development. Neither parent fully understood the significance of the morning's successful test, but both recognized their daughter's dedication and technical competence. The conversation eventually turned to Riley's senior year course selections and post-graduation. In planning, Mrs. Sawyer had scheduled a meeting for the following week to discuss college applications and career counseling, and Riley knew that she would face renewed pressure to pursue more practical educational paths. The guidance counselor's well-intentioned advice reflected the limited opportunities available to most Millfield High graduates, but it failed to account for Riley's exceptional capabilities and passionate commitment to aerospace engineering. As the evening progressed, Riley found herself back in the workshop, reviewing technical data and sketching ideas for future projects. The successful hybrid motor test had opened possibilities for more ambitious rocket designs that could demonstrate capabilities approaching those of professional aerospace systems. However, realizing those possibilities would require resources, and support that seemed unlikely to materialize in rural Kansas. The stars visible through the barn's windows reminded Riley of the ultimate destination that motivated her aerospace interests. The rockets that she designed and built in her converted barn workshop were ultimately intended to contribute toward humanity's expansion beyond Earth, even if her individual contributions seemed insignificant compared to the massive government and corporate programs that dominated space exploration. The isolation and skepticism that characterized her current circumstances would not diminish the validity of her technical achievements or the importance of her long-term objectives. The day that had begun with a routine test of rocket propulsion systems had evolved into a milestone that would define Riley's understanding of her own capabilities and potential. The hybrid motor that performed so successfully in her makeshift test facility represented more than just a technical achievement. It symbolized her determination to pursue excellence despite isolation, skepticism, and limited resources. The path forward remained uncertain, but Riley's confidence in her technical abilities had never been stronger. The piercing sound of Riley's phone ringing at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in late August shattered the peaceful quiet of her workshop, where she had been fine-tuning fuel mixture calculations since before dawn. The caller ID displayed Millfield High School, which immediately sent a jolt of anxiety through her system. School wouldn't officially start for another week, and administrative calls this early typically meant problems rather than opportunities. "Riley, this is Mrs. Sawyer," came the familiar voice of her guidance counselor, though it carried an unusual tone of excitement mixed with bureaucratic efficiency. "I need you to come to school immediately. There's been a development regarding your college applications that requires immediate attention, and we have visitors who specifically requested to meet with you this morning." The cryptic nature of Mrs. Sawyer's call left Riley feeling unsettled as she quickly changed from her workshop clothes into something more appropriate for a school meeting. Her parents had already left for their respective jobs, leaving a note about leftover casserole in the refrigerator and reminders about various household responsibilities. The 20-minute drive to Millfield High gave Riley time to speculate about what kind of development could possibly require such urgent attention. But none of her theories seemed particularly plausible. Millfield High School appeared unusually active for a morning during the final week of summer break. Several unfamiliar vehicles were parked in the visitor spaces near the main entrance, including a dark SUV with government license plates and a rental car that seemed out of place in the school's typically empty parking lot. Riley's anxiety intensified as she approached the building, wondering what kind of situation could possibly involve outside officials and her college application process. Mrs. Sawyer met Riley at the main entrance with an expression that combined professional composure with barely contained excitement. The guidance counselor had worked at Millfield High for over 15 years and had developed a reputation for steady, practical advice that helped students navigate the limited opportunities available in rural Kansas. However, her demeanor this morning suggested something far outside her normal experience. "Riley, before we go to the conference room, I need to explain what's happening," Mrs. Sawyer said, as they walked through the empty hallways toward the administrative offices. "Yesterday afternoon, I received a call from someone claiming to represent a federal aerospace research initiative. Initially, I assumed it was some kind of scam or mistaken contact, but after several verification calls, I've confirmed that these people are legitimate government representatives." The explanation only deepened Riley's confusion. She had never had any contact with federal agencies, and her amateur rocket activities seemed far too insignificant to attract government attention. The possibility that her workshop projects could have somehow come to official notice seemed both thrilling and terrifying, especially given the increasingly stringent regulations governing amateur rocketry activities. The representatives explained that they've been monitoring amateur aerospace activities as part of a talent identification program, Mrs. Sawyer continued. "Apparently, your online activities and correspondence with other rocket enthusiasts have created what they called a technical signature that attracted their attention. They've requested a meeting to discuss your projects and potential opportunities." The conference room contained 3 individuals who immediately distinguished themselves from typical Millfield High visitors through their professional appearance and obvious comfort with technical discussions. The first was a woman in her 40s, wearing a business suit that suggested both authority and scientific background. The second was a younger man whose casual but expensive clothing and confident demeanor marked him as someone accustomed to high-level technical environments. The third was an older gentleman whose bearing and formal attire suggested military or government service. "Ms. Chen," the woman said, rising to shake Riley's hand with firm professionalism, "I'm Dr. Sarah Martinez, Aerospace Systems Analyst with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. These are my colleagues, Dr. James Parker from the Advanced Propulsion Research Laboratory, and Colonel Robert Hayes, who coordinates our talent acquisition programs. We've been following your work with considerable interest." Riley felt her heart rate accelerate as she absorbed the implications. of Dr. Martinez's introduction. Representatives from NASA and other aerospace organizations had somehow become aware of her amateur rocket activities and had traveled to rural Kansas specifically to meet with her. The surreal nature of the situation made her question whether she was experiencing some kind of elaborate dream or practical joke. "We understand this meeting might seem unusual," Dr. Parker interjected with a reassuring smile, "but our monitoring systems have identified your technical activities as significantly above average for amateur aerospace work. The hybrid propulsion system that you've been developing has characteristics that suggest genuine innovation rather than simple replication of existing designs." Colonel Hayes opened a folder containing what appeared to be detailed technical documentation and photographs that Riley immediately recognized as relating to her workshop projects. The scope and accuracy of the information was startling, suggesting that her supposedly private amateur activities had been under observation for some time. The realization that government agencies possessed detailed knowledge of her work was both flattering and unsettling. "Ms. Chen, we're here because your rocket designs demonstrate technical sophistication that typically requires graduate-level aerospace engineering education," Dr. Martinez explained. "The fuel formulations that you've developed show innovative approaches to hybrid propulsion that our own research teams have been investigating. Your manufacturing techniques and testing protocols indicate practical skills that many professional engineers lack." The praise from legitimate aerospace professionals felt surreal to Riley, who had grown accustomed to skepticism and dismissal from virtually everyone in her immediate environment. The contrast between her local reputation as an impractical dreamer and the federal government's apparent interest in her technical capabilities created a cognitive dissonance that she struggled to process. The validation that she had craved for years was finally materializing, but in a context that seemed almost too extraordinary to believe. "We'd like to discuss several potential opportunities that might interest you," Colonel Hayes said, spreading additional documents across the conference room table. "These range from educational partnerships with aerospace research institutions to potential involvement in classified development programs that could utilize your demonstrated capabilities. However, before we proceed, we need to understand your long-term objectives and evaluate your commitment to aerospace engineering as a career path." Mrs. Sawyer had remained silent during the initial exchanges, but Riley could see that the guidance counselor was struggling to comprehend the implications of the conversation taking place in her conference room. The federal representatives were discussing opportunities that exceeded anything typically available to Millfield High graduates, regardless of their academic achievements or career aspirations. "I need to understand how you became aware of my work," Riley said, finding her voice despite the overwhelming nature of the situation. "My rocket activities have been entirely amateur projects conducted in my family's barn. I haven't published any research or submitted designs to professional organizations." Dr. Parker smiled knowingly before responding. "Modern communication technologies make it impossible to conduct significant technical work in complete isolation. Your correspondence with other amateur rocket enthusiasts, your online research activities, your component purchases, and your documentation of test results have created a pattern that our monitoring systems identified as potentially significant. We've been tracking your progress for approximately 18 months. The revelation that her private aerospace pursuits had been under government surveillance for over a year was simultaneously thrilling and disturbing. Riley had assumed that her workshop activities were known only to her family and a small network of amateur rocket enthusiasts with whom she corresponded online. The discovery that federal agencies had been monitoring her work suggested that her technical achievements were more significant than she had realized. "The specific trigger for our direct contact was your recent successful test of the hybrid, a propulsion system," Dr. Martinez explained. The performance characteristics that you documented indicate efficiency levels that approach those achieved by some professional rocket systems. That level of achievement by a high school student working independently is virtually unprecedented. Colonel Hayes leaned forward with obvious interest. Ms. Chen, we're prepared to offer you several pathways that could accelerate your aerospace career by decades compared to conventional educational approaches. These opportunities would provide access to resources, mentorship, and project assignments that are typically reserved for established professionals with years of experience and security clearances. The mention of security clearances introduced complications that Riley hadn't considered. Government aerospace work often involved classified technologies and restricted access that required extensive background investigations and ongoing security monitoring. The prospect of entering such an environment directly from high school in rural Kansas seemed both exciting and daunting. What would these opportunities require from me? Riley asked, attempting to understand the practical implications of the federal representative's proposals. I'm still a high school student with family responsibilities and limited financial resources. I haven't even completed my college applications yet. Dr. Martinez exchanged glances with her colleagues before responding. The most immediate opportunity would involve a full scholarship to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, with additional stipends for living expenses and research activities. You would be enrolled in an accelerated program that combines undergraduate and graduate coursework, with the expectation that you could complete both degrees in approximately 4 years instead of the typical 6. The MIT scholarship offer represented everything that Riley had dreamed about, but never dared to expect. The financial obstacles that had made elite aerospace education seem impossible were being swept away by federal resources that she hadn't known existed. The opportunity to study at one of the world's premier aerospace engineering institutions would provide access to facilities, faculty, and research opportunities that could transform her amateur interests into professional capabilities. Additionally, Dr. Parker continued, you would be assigned to work with our advanced propulsion research teams during summer breaks and academic holidays. These positions would provide hands-on experience with cutting-edge aerospace technologies, while contributing to projects that directly support national space exploration objectives. Colonel Hayes presented the final component of their proposal. Upon completion of your educational program, you would be guaranteed a position with NASA's Advanced Propulsion Development Division with a starting salary and security clearance, a level that reflects your demonstrated capabilities rather than your years of experience. The career track would provide opportunities for rapid advancement based on technical achievements and project contributions. The comprehensive nature of the federal offer exceeded Riley's most optimistic fantasies about her aerospace future. The pathway from rural Kansas farm girl to professional aerospace engineer was being offered as a complete package that eliminated virtually every obstacle that had seemed insurmountable just hours earlier. The transformation from local oddity to federal priority represented a validation of her technical capabilities that she had never expected to receive. I need to discuss this with my parents, Riley said, attempting to maintain some semblance of rational decision-making despite the overwhelming nature of the opportunity being presented. These are life-changing decisions that affect my entire family, not just my individual career aspirations. Mrs. Sawyer finally found her voice. Riley, these gentlemen are offering you opportunities that, well, frankly, I've never encountered anything like this in 15 years of college counseling. The financial value alone of what they're proposing probably exceeds $1 million. Dr. Martinez nodded in acknowledgement of the guidance counselor's assessment. Mrs. Sawyer is correct about the financial implications, but the real value lies in the career acceleration and access to aerospace technologies that would otherwise require decades to achieve through conventional pathways. Ms. Chen's demonstrated capabilities justify this level of investment. The meeting concluded with agreements for follow-up discussions and additional documentation that would formalize the various opportunities being offered. Riley left the school in a state of shock, carrying folders full of information about programs and possibilities that had been completely outside her awareness just hours earlier. The drive home provided time to begin processing the extraordinary reversal of fortune that had transformed her from small-town dreamer to federal priority in the span of a single morning. The empty farmhouse felt different as Riley returned to her normal environment, as if the federal offer had created a separation between her previous life and the possibilities that now lay ahead. The workshop that had been her sanctuary and creative outlet for years now seemed like a launching pad that had successfully propelled her toward the aerospace career that had seemed so impossible from rural Kansas. The kitchen table had never seemed smaller than it did that evening when Riley spread out the NASA documentation before her parents, the official government letterhead and technical specifications, creating an almost surreal contrast against her mother's cheerful floral tablecloth. David Chen set down his coffee cup with unusual care, his engineering background allowing him to immediately grasp the significance of the federal aerospace opportunities being offered to his 17-year-old daughter, while Lynn examined the MIT scholarship details with the methodical precision she applied to complex veterinary diagnoses. "This is real," David said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and paternal concern as he reviewed the technical specifications that Dr. Martinez's team had compiled regarding Riley's rocket work. "These people have been documenting your projects with professional-grade analysis. Look at these performance calculations, Riley. They're treating your hybrid propulsion system like it's equivalent to commercial aerospace technology." Lynn had focused her attention on the educational and career pathway documents, her practical nature immediately identifying the life-changing implications of the federal offer. The full scholarship to MIT eliminated financial obstacles that had seemed insurmountable for a middle-class farming family, while the guaranteed NASA career position provided security that few aerospace engineering graduates could expect to achieve. "Honey, do you understand what this means?" Lynn asked, looking directly at her daughter with an expression that combined maternal pride with genuine amazement. "These government representatives are offering you a direct path to exactly the career you've been dreaming about since middle school. Everything we thought was impossible is suddenly being handed to you on a silver platter." Riley found herself struggling to fully comprehend the transformation that had occurred in her life over the course of a single day. The isolation and skepticism that had characterized her aerospace pursuits in rural Kansas had been replaced by federal recognition and unprecedented opportunities. The validation from legitimate government aerospace professionals represented everything she had hoped for but never dared to expect. However, the magnitude of the opportunity also created new anxieties that Riley hadn't anticipated. The prospect of leaving Millfield for MIT meant abandoning the familiar environment where she had developed her technical skills and personal identity. The accelerated educational program would require her to compete with students from elite preparatory schools and privileged backgrounds that had provided advantages she had never experienced. "I'm scared," Riley admitted to her parents, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I get to MIT and discover that I'm not actually as capable as these NASA people think I am? What if my success here in Kansas doesn't translate to success in a real aerospace engineering program?" David reached across the table to take his daughter's hand, his expression reflecting both understanding and confidence. "Riley, I've been watching your technical work for 3 years. The sophistication of your rocket designs and the precision of your testing protocols are genuinely impressive, even by professional standards. These federal representatives didn't travel to rural Kansas to offer opportunities to someone they considered marginally qualified." The conversation continued late into the evening as the Chen family explored every aspect of the NASA offer and its implications for Riley's future. The financial benefits were substantial, but the personal and professional opportunities represented a complete transformation of Riley's life trajectory. The path from small-town farm girl to aerospace engineer was being compressed from decades into just a few years. Lynn raised practical concerns about the security clearance requirements and government employment obligations that would accompany the federal opportunities. "Riley, you need to understand that accepting this offer means committing to a career path that involves national security responsibilities and government oversight. This isn't just about following your passion for rocket science anymore." The following morning brought the first tangible evidence of how quickly Riley's life was changing. Mrs. Sawyer called before 7 a.m. to inform her that additional federal representatives would be arriving at the school later that day to conduct follow-up meetings and begin the formal application processes for the various programs being offered. The guidance counselor's voice carried an excitement that reflected her recognition of the historic nature of what was happening to one of her students. "Riley, in my entire career, I've never seen anything like the level of attention you're receiving from these federal agencies," Mrs. Sawyer explained. "I've been contacted by representatives from 3 different government organizations, all expressing interest in your aerospace work. This is completely unprecedented for a student from our school district." The second meeting at Millfield High included an expanded group of federal representatives who brought additional documentation and more detailed explanations of the opportunities being offered. Dr. Martinez had returned with colleagues from NASA's Advanced Propulsion Research Division, while Colonel Hayes was accompanied by representatives from the Department of Defense's aerospace development programs. The scope of interest in Riley's amateur rocket work was becoming increasingly apparent. "Ms. Chen, we've completed our preliminary evaluation of your technical capabilities," Dr. Martinez announced, "and the results exceed our initial assessments. Your hybrid propulsion system demonstrates innovations that our own research teams have been investigating for several years. The fuel formulations you've developed independently show remarkable sophistication for amateur work." Dr. Parker presented a more detailed analysis of Riley's rocket designs, including computer simulations that predicted performance characteristics for scaled-up versions of her hybrid propulsion system. The projections suggested that her amateur innovations could potentially contribute to professional aerospace projects currently under development by NASA and defense contractors. "What we're seeing in your work is genuine research and development, rather than simple replication of existing technologies," Dr. Parker explained. "The manufacturing techniques you've developed, the testing protocols you've implemented, and the performance optimization you've achieved all indicate capabilities that typically require years of professional experience to develop." Colonel Hayes introduced a new element to the discussion by explaining the national security implications of Riley's aerospace work. Advanced propulsion technologies were considered strategically important by the federal government, and individuals who demonstrated exceptional capabilities in these areas were actively recruited for classified development programs. "Ms. Chen, your technical achievements have brought you to the attention of several government agencies that are responsible for maintaining American leadership in aerospace technologies," Colonel Hayes explained. "The opportunities we're offering reflect not only your current capabilities, but also your potential contributions to national aerospace objectives. The expanded federal team provided more detailed information about the educational pathway being offered through MIT. The accelerated program would combine undergraduate coursework with graduate-level research projects that directly supported ongoing NASA development efforts. Riley would have access to facilities and resources that were typically reserved for established professionals with years of experience. The research projects you would work on are at the cutting edge of aerospace technology, Dr. Martinez explained. Your hybrid propulsion innovations would contribute to development programs for Mars exploration vehicles, satellite positioning systems, and advanced spacecraft designs. These are projects that will define the future of space exploration. The career opportunities following completion of the MIT program were equally impressive. NASA's Advanced Propulsion Research Division was developing technologies for missions to Mars, asteroid mining operations, and eventual interstellar exploration projects. Riley's demonstrated capabilities in hybrid propulsion systems would position her to contribute to projects that represented the future of human space exploration. However, the federal representatives also explained the obligations and restrictions that would accompany the opportunities being offered. Security clearance requirements would involve extensive background investigations and ongoing monitoring of Riley's activities and associations. Government employment would include restrictions on outside activities and requirements for periodic polygraph examinations. We want you to understand that accepting our offer means committing to a career path that involves significant personal sacrifices in exchange for unprecedented professional opportunities, Colonel Hayes explained. The work you would be doing is considered vital to national security, and that status comes with both privileges and responsibilities. Riley spent the afternoon reviewing additional technical documentation that the federal representatives had provided regarding their assessment of her rocket work. The analysis was more comprehensive and sophisticated than anything she had expected, demonstrating a level of government interest that seemed almost overwhelming. The performance projections for scaled-up versions of her hybrid propulsion system suggested applications ranging from satellite launch vehicles to interplanetary spacecraft. The fuel formulations she had developed through amateur experimentation were being compared favorably to commercial aerospace technologies that cost millions of dollars to develop. Your work demonstrates the kind of innovative thinking that drives breakthroughs in aerospace technology, Dr. Parker had explained. The combination of theoretical understanding and practical implementation skills that you've developed is exactly what we need for our most challenging research projects. The social implications of Riley's sudden transition from local oddity to federal priority were becoming apparent as news of the government meetings spread through Millfield's tight-knit community. Neighbors who had previously dismissed her rocket activities as impractical hobbies were now viewing her with mixtures of amazement, pride, and curiosity about the opportunities being offered. Mrs. Henderson, who lived on the adjacent farm property, stopped by that evening to congratulate Riley and her parents on the extraordinary recognition of her aerospace work. "I have to admit, I never understood what Riley was doing out in that barn," she confessed to Lynn. "But if NASA thinks it's important enough to send representatives to Kansas, then I guess we've been witnessing something pretty special." The transformation in community perception reflected the validation that Riley had been seeking throughout. Her years of independent aerospace research, the skepticism and dismissal that had characterized local reactions to her rocket activities were being replaced by recognition and respect from people who finally understood the significance of her technical achievements. However, the newfound attention also created pressure and expectations that Riley hadn't experienced before. Community members who had previously ignored her work were now asking detailed questions about her projects and expressing opinions about the opportunities being offered by federal agencies. The privacy and independence that had characterized her workshop activities were being replaced by public scrutiny and community investment in her decisions. Riley's closest friends at Millfield High were struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the changes occurring in her life. Sarah Williams, who had been Riley's lab partner in advanced chemistry classes, expressed both excitement and concern about the federal opportunities being offered. "Riley, this is incredible, but it's also kind of scary," Sarah admitted during a phone conversation that evening. "You're going to be leaving everything familiar behind to enter a world that none of us understand. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of change?" The question highlighted one of Riley's primary concerns about accepting the NASA offer. The transition from rural Kansas to MIT would involve not only academic challenges, but also social and cultural adjustments that she had never experienced. The privileged backgrounds and elite educational preparation of her future classmates would create competitive dynamics that were completely foreign to her small-town experience. David spent the evening reviewing the technical documentation that the federal representatives had provided, his engineering background allowing him to appreciate the significance of the government's assessment of Riley's work. "Riley, these people aren't just impressed by your rocket building," he explained. "They're recognizing genuine innovation that could contribute to projects worth billions of dollars." The conversation with her father helped Riley understand that the opportunities being offered represented more than just educational and career advancement. Her amateur innovations were being viewed as potentially valuable contributions to national aerospace objectives that extended far beyond her individual aspirations. As the day concluded, Riley found herself in her workshop, surrounded by the rocket prototypes and testing equipment that had attracted federal attention and transformed her life. The familiar environment felt different now, charged with new significance and possibility. The amateur projects that had begun as expressions of curiosity and creativity had evolved into the foundation for opportunities that exceeded her most ambitious dreams. The choice that lay before her would determine not only her individual future, but also her potential contributions to humanity's expansion beyond Earth. The isolation and skepticism that had characterized her aerospace pursuits in rural Kansas were being replaced by recognition, resources, and responsibilities that would define the rest of her life. The sound of gravel crunching under multiple vehicle tires at 9:15 a.m. on Friday morning announced the arrival of what Mrs. Sawyer had described as the most significant delegation ever to visit Millfield High School. Riley watched from her bedroom window as a convoy of black SUVs and official sedans pulled into the school parking lot, followed by a large white van that bore the unmistakable NASA logo on its side panels. The sight sent a mixture of excitement and nervousness coursing through her system as she realized that her amateur rocket work was about to undergo the most comprehensive professional evaluation of her life. Dr. Martinez had called the previous evening to explain that NASA's evaluation team would be conducting a full technical assessment of Riley's workshop facilities and rocket designs. The review would involve senior aerospace engineers, propulsion specialists, and materials scientists who would examine every aspect of her amateur research program. Their conclusions would determine the scope and nature of the opportunities that the federal government was prepared to offer. "Riley, this isn't just a formality," Dr. Martinez had explained during their phone conversation. "Our preliminary assessment based on documentation and test data has been extremely positive, but we need to conduct hands-on evaluation of your equipment, facilities, and actual rocket hardware before finalizing our recommendations. The team arriving tomorrow includes some of the most experienced propulsion engineers in the country." The drive to school felt surreal, as Riley contemplated the reality that NASA's top engineers were traveling to rural Kansas specifically to evaluate her amateur aerospace work. The contrast between her small-town environment and the sophisticated federal attention she was receiving created a cognitive dissonance that she was still struggling to process. The validation that she had craved for years was materializing in ways that exceeded her most optimistic fantasies. Millfield High School's parking lot had been transformed into what resembled a small federal command center. In addition to the government vehicles, several large equipment trailers had been positioned near the building's entrance, and personnel in NASA uniforms were unloading sophisticated electronic equipment and measurement devices. The scale of the operation suggested a level of seriousness and resource commitment that seemed almost overwhelming. "Riley, I want you to meet Dr. Elizabeth Warren, NASA's chief propulsion engineer," Dr. Martinez said, introducing a woman whose professional, bearing and obvious technical expertise immediately commanded respect. Dr. Warren oversees all advanced propulsion research for our Mars exploration program, and she's specifically requested to evaluate your hybrid rocket designs. Dr. Warren's handshake was firm, and her direct gaze suggested someone accustomed to making critical technical assessments under pressure. "Ms. Chen, I've reviewed the preliminary documentation regarding your propulsion work, and I'm here because the performance characteristics you've achieved appear to exceed what we typically see from amateur rocketeers. I'm looking forward to examining your actual hardware and testing facilities." The evaluation team included specialists in combustion chemistry, materials engineering, guidance systems, and manufacturing processes. Each expert brought sophisticated measurement equipment and evaluation criteria that would subject Riley's amateur work to professional-grade analysis. The thoroughness of their approach demonstrated the seriousness with which NASA was treating her technical achievements. "Ms. Chen, we're going to spend the next several hours conducting comprehensive testing and analysis of your rocket systems," explained Dr. Robert Kim, a materials scientist whose expertise focused on high-temperature aerospace applications. "We'll be examining everything from fuel chemistry to structural integrity to manufacturing quality. This evaluation will determine whether your innovations can contribute to our ongoing research programs." The convoy of vehicles followed Riley's directions to her family's farm, where the barn workshop that had been her sanctuary for 3 years would now be subjected to the most intensive professional scrutiny imaginable. The sight of NASA vehicles parked in her family's gravel driveway created a surreal juxtaposition between her rural environment and the sophisticated federal attention her work was receiving. Dr. Warren's first reaction upon entering Riley's workshop was visible amazement at the sophistication of the equipment and organization that a high school student had assembled independently. "Ms. Chen, this facility rivals some professional aerospace development laboratories I've visited. The precision of your test equipment and the comprehensiveness of your documentation protocols are genuinely impressive." The evaluation process began with detailed examination of Riley's hybrid rocket motors, with each specialist focusing on their area of expertise. Dr. Kim analyzed the materials composition and manufacturing quality of critical components, while Dr. Warren evaluated the combustion chamber design and nozzle characteristics. A guidance systems expert examined the electronic control systems that Riley had developed for flight stability and data collection. "The fuel grain composition is remarkable," Dr. Kim announced after conducting spectroscopic analysis of Riley's proprietary rubber formulation. "The polymer matrix shows optimization characteristics that suggest extensive experimentation and testing. The performance characteristics we're measuring indicate efficiency levels that approach commercial aerospace standards." Dr. Warren's evaluation of the combustion chamber and nozzle design produced equally positive results. The throat geometry and expansion ratio demonstrate sophisticated understanding of supersonic flow dynamics. The manufacturing precision is excellent, and the material selection shows careful consideration of thermal and mechanical stress factors. The electronic guidance and control systems that Riley had developed received particular attention from NASA's avionics specialists. The microcontroller programming, sensor integration, and data acquisition capabilities demonstrated software engineering skills that were typically developed through years of professional experience rather than amateur experimentation. Ms. Chen, your flight control algorithms show remarkable sophistication, observed Dr. Jennifer Martinez, no relation to Dr. Sarah Martinez, who specialized in spacecraft guidance systems. The real-time stability corrections and trajectory optimization routines are comparable to systems we use on professional aerospace vehicles. How did you develop this level of programming expertise? Riley explained her self-directed learning process, which had involved online courses, technical textbooks, and extensive correspondence with professional engineers who had provided guidance and encouragement. The isolation of rural Kansas had actually provided advantages by forcing her to develop comprehensive capabilities across multiple engineering disciplines rather than specializing in narrow technical areas. The testing protocols that Riley had developed for evaluating rocket performance received particular praise from the NASA evaluation team. The data acquisition systems, safety procedures, and documentation standards demonstrated professional-grade methodology that ensured reliable and repeatable results. The comprehensive nature of her testing approach had allowed her to optimize performance characteristics through systematic experimentation. Your testing methodology is more thorough than what we see in many professional aerospace programs, Dr. Warren commented while reviewing Riley's test data archives. The statistical analysis of performance variations, the careful control of test variables, and the comprehensive documentation of results demonstrate genuine research capabilities rather than simple amateur experimentation. The evaluation team conducted their own performance tests of Riley's hybrid propulsion system, using NASA's portable testing equipment to verify the performance characteristics that her amateur data had documented. The results confirmed that her fuel formulations and combustion chamber designs were achieving efficiency levels that exceeded the team's initial expectations. Ms. Chen, we're measuring specific impulse values that approach those achieved by some commercial rocket systems, Dr. Kim announced after completing the performance analysis. The combustion stability and controllability characteristics indicate that your hybrid design could potentially scale to much larger applications than typical amateur rockets. The manufacturing quality assessment revealed another aspect of Riley's capabilities that impressed the NASA specialists. The precision machining, material selection, and quality control procedures that she had implemented in her barn workshop demonstrated practical skills that were typically developed through years of professional experience in aerospace manufacturing environments. The dimensional tolerances and surface finish quality we're measuring are consistent with aerospace industry standards, observed Dr. Riley Chen, a manufacturing engineer who specialized in rocket component production. The fact that you've achieved this level of precision, using essentially amateur workshop equipment, indicates exceptional technical skills and attention to detail. As the evaluation progressed, Riley began to understand that the NASA team was not simply assessing her current capabilities, but also evaluating her potential for contributing to cutting-edge aerospace research programs. The questions they asked and the aspects of her work they emphasized suggested that they were considering applications far beyond typical educational or entry-level positions. Ms. Chen, "We're particularly interested in your approach to fuel formulation optimization," Dr. Warren explained. "The systematic methodology you've used to develop your rubber compounds shows research capabilities that could contribute to our advanced propulsion development programs. Have you considered the potential applications of your fuel innovations to larger-scale rocket systems?" The conversation revealed that NASA's Mars exploration program was actively seeking innovations in hybrid propulsion technology that could provide improved performance and reliability for interplanetary missions. Riley's amateur discoveries were being evaluated as potential contributions to spacecraft designs that would carry humans to Mars within the next 2 decades. Your hybrid propulsion innovations address several technical challenges that we've been working on for our Mars mission requirements, Dr. Martinez explained. The efficiency improvements and controllability characteristics that you've achieved could potentially contribute to significant advances in spacecraft propulsion capabilities. The revelation that her amateur rocket work could contribute to Mars exploration missions represented a level of significance that Riley had never imagined possible. The projects that had begun as expressions of curiosity and creativity in a converted barn were being evaluated as potential components of humanity's expansion to other planets. Dr. Warren's final assessment summarized the evaluation team's conclusions in terms that exceeded Riley's most optimistic expectations. "Ms. Chen, your technical achievements represent genuine innovations in hybrid propulsion technology. The combination of theoretical understanding, practical implementation skills, and research methodology that you've demonstrated is exactly what NASA needs for our most challenging development programs." The formal evaluation concluded with detailed documentation of the team's findings and recommendations for Riley's integration into NASA's research programs. The assessment would determine not only her educational pathway through MIT, but also her specific assignments within NASA's Advanced Propulsion Research Division upon completion of her accelerated degree program. "Ms. Chen, based on our evaluation, we're prepared to offer you direct involvement in classified aerospace research and programs that are typically reserved for engineers with decades of professional experience," Colonel Hayes announced. "Your demonstrated capabilities justify accelerated career advancement that would position you to contribute immediately to our most important national aerospace objectives." The scope of the opportunities being offered reflected the evaluation team's assessment that Riley's amateur innovations represented genuine contributions to aerospace technology rather than simply impressive student projects. The career pathway being proposed would allow her to transition directly from high school to cutting-edge professional research without the typical gradual advancement through entry-level positions. However, the expanded opportunities also came with increased responsibilities and security requirements that would fundamentally alter Riley's relationship with her family, community, and personal freedom. The classified nature of the research programs would require security clearances that involved extensive background investigations and ongoing monitoring of her activities and associations. "Riley, you need to understand that accepting these enhanced opportunities means committing to a career path that involves significant personal sacrifices," Dr. Martinez explained. "The work you would be doing is considered vital to national security, and that status comes with both exceptional privileges and substantial responsibilities." As the NASA evaluation team prepared to depart, Riley found herself contemplating a future that had been completely redefined over the course of a single morning. The amateur rocket activities that had been dismissed by her local community as impractical hobbies had been validated by the federal government's top aerospace professionals as genuine innovations worthy of national investment. The transformation From small-town farm girl to federal aerospace priority had occurred with stunning rapidity, but the implications would extend far beyond her individual career prospects. The recognition of her technical capabilities represented validation of the potential that existed in unexpected places, and the importance of supporting innovative thinking regardless of its geographical or social origins. The evening brought quiet reflection in her workshop, surrounded by the rocket prototypes and testing equipment that had attracted federal attention and transformed her life's trajectory. The familiar environment felt different now, charged with new significance and possibility, as Riley contemplated her role in projects that could define humanity's future among the stars. The phone call that would shatter Riley's newfound confidence came at 11:42 p.m. on a Sunday evening, exactly 1 week after NASA's comprehensive evaluation had validated her technical capabilities and opened pathways to unprecedented opportunities. Riley had been in her workshop sketching improvements to her hybrid propulsion design based on suggestions from Dr. Warren's team when her father's urgent voice called her to the house. David Chen's expression carried a gravity that immediately sent alarm bells through Riley's consciousness. "Riley, there's been a development," David said, his engineering background evident in his careful choice of words. "Dr. Martinez called to inform us that NASA's offer is being placed on indefinite hold, pending an internal review process." She couldn't provide specific details, but she emphasized that this doesn't reflect any concerns about your technical capabilities. The news struck Riley like a physical blow, transforming her excitement about the MIT scholarship and NASA career pathway into confusion and growing dread. The validation that had seemed so solid just days earlier was suddenly being questioned by the same federal agencies that had proclaimed her work revolutionary. The emotional whiplash from triumph to uncertainty left her struggling to comprehend what could have changed so dramatically. Riley Chen emerged from the kitchen where she had been listening to David's phone conversation with Dr. Martinez, her veterinarians, training in crisis management evident in her composed but concerned demeanor. "Honey," Dr. Martinez emphasized that this is likely a temporary administrative issue rather than a rejection of your qualifications. Government agencies have complex approval processes that sometimes create delays. However, Riley's intuition suggested that the situation was more serious than her parents were acknowledging. The NASA evaluation team had demonstrated such enthusiasm about her technical innovations that a simple administrative delay seemed implausible. The professional excitement and resource commitment that the federal representatives had displayed indicated a level of institutional support that wouldn't typically be subject to casual review processes. The following morning brought a call from Mrs. Sawyer that confirmed Riley's worst fears about the developing situation. The guidance counselor's voice carried the careful neutrality that educational professionals used when delivering difficult news, but her underlying concern was unmistakable. "Riley, I've been contacted by several federal agencies requesting additional information about your background, family history, and community connections," Mrs. Sawyer explained. "The inquiries suggest that someone has raised questions about your security clearance eligibility, or possibly about the circumstances surrounding your technical achievements." The implication that Riley's character or capabilities were being questioned sent waves of anger and frustration through her system. The years of independent research, the countless hours of experimentation, and the sophisticated results that had impressed NASA's top engineers were suddenly being subjected to scrutiny that seemed designed to find reasons for disqualification rather than validation. "What kind of questions are they asking?" Riley demanded, her voice reflecting the emotional turbulence that was consuming her thoughts. "My rocket work has been completely transparent and documented. There's nothing questionable about my technical achievements or my background." Mrs. Sawyer's response revealed the extent of the investigation that was apparently underway. The inquiries have focused on your online communications with amateur rocket enthusiasts, your component purchases from international suppliers, and your correspondence with individuals who may have connections to foreign aerospace programs. They're also investigating your family's immigration history and your father's professional associations. The revelation that Riley's family was being subjected to security investigations because of her aerospace achievements felt like a betrayal of everything the federal representatives had promised about her opportunities and potential. The ethnic profiling implicit in the scrutiny of her father's background and professional connections highlighted the discrimination that often accompanied national security concerns. David Chen's reaction to the security investigation was controlled, but clearly angry. His own experience with government clearance processes during his engineering career had prepared him for the possibility of background checks, but the intensive scrutiny being applied to his family seemed disproportionate to the opportunities being offered to his daughter. Riley, I want you to understand that this investigation isn't really about your technical capabilities, David explained during a family meeting that evening. The federal agencies are concerned about security risks that they perceive in our family background and community connections. Your mother and I immigrated from China 20 years ago, and that fact alone makes some government officials nervous. The realization that her family's heritage was being treated as a potential security threat rather than a source of diverse perspectives and capabilities filled Riley with a mixture of anger and disillusionment. The meritocratic ideals that had seemed to guide NASA's evaluation of her technical work were being overshadowed by prejudices and fears that had nothing to do with her qualifications or character. Riley Chen had conducted her own research into the security clearance process and discovered that individuals with foreign family connections often faced extended investigations and sometimes arbitrary denials regardless of their personal qualifications. Riley, we need to prepare for the possibility that these security concerns could eliminate your opportunities with NASA despite their obvious enthusiasm about your technical work. The emotional impact of potentially losing the aerospace career that had seemed within reach was devastating for Riley. The validation from federal professionals had transformed her understanding of her own capabilities and potential, but the security investigation was revealing that technical excellence wasn't sufficient to overcome institutional prejudices and bureaucratic obstacles. The community reaction to news of the federal investigation created additional stress for the Chen family. Neighbors who had recently celebrated Riley's achievements were now asking uncomfortable questions about the family's background and the nature of her aerospace activities. The pride and excitement that had characterized local response to NASA's interest was being replaced by suspicion and uncertainty. Mrs. Henderson, who had been among the first to congratulate Riley on her federal recognition, stopped by the farm with questions that reflected the growing community concern. Lynn, people are saying that the government is investigating Riley's rocket work because they think she might be sharing secrets with foreign countries. Is there any truth to those rumors? The suggestion that Riley's amateur rocket activities could constitute security threats or industrial espionage was both absurd and deeply hurtful. The transparent nature of her research, the documentation of her independent discoveries, and the enthusiasm of NASA's evaluation team had all confirmed that her work represented genuine American innovation rather than foreign influence. However, the rumors circulating through Millfield demonstrated how quickly public perception could shift from admiration to suspicion when federal investigations became involved. The community that had begun to take pride in Riley's achievements was now questioning whether her success represented a threat to national security rather than a source of local distinction. Riley's closest friends at Millfield High were struggling. To understand the implications of the federal investigation and its impact on her college and career plans. Sarah Williams expressed the confusion that many students felt about the dramatic reversal in Riley's circumstances. "Riley, last week everyone was talking about how you were going to MIT and working for NASA," Sarah said during a phone conversation. "Now people are saying that the government thinks you're some kind of spy. What's really happening?" The question highlighted Riley's own confusion about the investigation and its potential consequences. The federal representatives, who had been so enthusiastic about her technical capabilities, had provided no clear explanation for the security concerns that were jeopardizing her opportunities. The lack of transparency in the process left her feeling powerless and confused about how to respond. Dr. Martinez's follow-up calls provided little additional clarity about the investigation's scope or timeline. The NASA representative emphasized that the agency remained interested in Riley's technical capabilities, but explained that security clearance issues were handled by other federal departments with different priorities and procedures. "Riley, I want you to understand that NASA's technical assessment of your work remains unchanged," Dr. Martinez assured her during their most recent conversation. "The propulsion innovations you've developed are still considered valuable contributions to our research programs. However, we cannot proceed with employment or educational partnerships until the security clearance issues are resolved." The bureaucratic separation between technical evaluation and security assessment meant that Riley's demonstrated capabilities were essentially irrelevant to the investigation process. The federal agencies responsible for security clearances operated according to different criteria that prioritized risk avoidance over innovation potential. Colonel Hayes, who had been instrumental in developing the comprehensive opportunities package for Riley, was more direct about the challenges she was facing. "Ms. Chen, security clearance investigations for individuals with foreign family connections can take months or even years to complete. The process is designed to identify any potential risks to national security, and unfortunately, that means extensive scrutiny of factors that have nothing to do with your personal qualifications." The revelation that the investigation could continue indefinitely meant that Riley's senior year of high school would be dominated by uncertainty about her post-graduation plans. The MIT scholarship and NASA career pathway that had seemed guaranteed were now dependent on bureaucratic processes that were largely outside her control. The emotional toll of the prolonged uncertainty was becoming apparent in Riley's daily activities and relationships. The workshop that had been her sanctuary and source of creative fulfillment now felt like evidence in a federal investigation rather than a testament to her technical capabilities. The passion for aerospace engineering that had sustained her through years of isolation and skepticism was being overshadowed by anxiety about her family's security and her own future prospects. Riley's parents attempted to maintain optimism about the eventual resolution of the security clearance issues, but their own concern was evident in their increased attention to privacy and communication security. David had temporarily suspended his professional correspondence with international colleagues, while Lynn had become more cautious about discussing family matters with community members. The investigation's impact extended beyond the Chen family to affect Riley's relationships with teachers, classmates, and community members who had become invested in her success. The federal attention that had initially brought prestige and excitement to Millfield was now creating suspicion and uncertainty that affected the entire community's perception of diversity and achievement. Mrs. Sawyer had begun developing alternative college and career plans for Riley that didn't require security clearances or federal employment. The guidance counselor's backup strategies reflected the possibility that the investigation could permanently eliminate Riley's aerospace opportunities, despite her demonstrated technical capabilities. Riley, we need to ensure that you have viable alternatives if the federal opportunities don't materialize, Mrs. Sawyer explained during their most recent meeting. Your academic achievements and technical skills qualify you for numerous scholarships and programs that don't involve government security requirements. However, the alternative pathways seemed inadequate compared to the unprecedented opportunities that NASA had offered. The prospect of attending a conventional engineering program and pursuing a traditional aerospace career felt like settling for mediocrity after experiencing the validation and acceleration that federal recognition had provided. The evening brought solitary reflection in Riley's workshop, surrounded by the rocket prototypes and technical documentation that had attracted federal attention and then triggered the investigation that was threatening her future. The familiar environment felt tainted by the uncertainty and suspicion that now surrounded her technical achievements. The transformation from celebrated innovator to potential security risk had occurred with stunning rapidity, demonstrating how quickly institutional prejudices could override individual merit in systems designed to protect national interests. The validation that Riley had sought for years had been replaced by scrutiny that questioned not only her capabilities, but also her loyalty and character. The night sky visible through the barn windows reminded Riley of the aerospace dreams that had motivated her years of independent research and development. The stars that had once represented destinations for her rocket innovations now seemed distant and inaccessible, separated from her aspirations by bureaucratic obstacles that had nothing to do with technical capability or personal dedication. The breaking point came on a bitter February morning when Riley discovered that her workshop had been searched during the night. She arrived at the barn at her usual 6 a.m. to find subtle but unmistakable signs that someone had methodically examined her equipment, documentation, and rocket prototypes. Tools that she always arranged in specific configurations had been moved slightly. File cabinets that she kept meticulously organized showed evidence of careful but thorough searching. Most disturbing of all, her computer showed access logs indicating that someone had copied her entire hard drive while she slept. The violation of her private sanctuary sent waves of rage and desperation through Riley's consciousness. The workshop that had been her refuge and creative laboratory for years had been transformed into a crime scene by federal agents who apparently considered her technical achievements suspicious rather than admirable. The months of uncertainty and investigation had culminated in this ultimate breach of her personal space and intellectual property. David Chen's reaction to the covert search was controlled fury mixed with protective paternal instincts. His own experience with government security procedures had prepared him for invasive investigations, but the midnight search of his daughter's workshop represented an escalation that seemed both excessive and threatening. Riley, this search confirms that the investigation has moved beyond routine security clearance procedures, David explained, his engineering training evident in his systematic assessment of the evidence. Federal agents don't conduct covert searches unless they suspect criminal activity or national security violations. We need legal representation immediately. The family's decision to hire an attorney specializing in national security cases revealed the extent of the government's suspicions about Riley's aerospace activities. Attorney Rebecca Morrison, no relation to the historical Morrisons, had experience defending scientists and engineers who had been accused of technology transfer violations and industrial espionage. The Chen family is facing allegations that appear to be based more on ethnic profiling than legitimate security concerns, Attorney Morrison explained during their initial consultation. Riley's technical achievements and family background have been characterized as potential threats to national security, despite the obvious merit of her independent research and the initial enthusiasm from NASA representatives. The legal analysis revealed that Riley had become entangled in a broader federal initiative targeting Chinese-American scientists and engineers who were suspected of transferring technology to foreign governments. The investigation had apparently expanded from routine security clearance procedures to a full counterintelligence operation based on assumptions about ethnic loyalty and family connections. The government's position seems to be that Riley's technical capabilities, combined with her family's Chinese heritage, create an unacceptable security risk regardless of her personal qualifications or demonstrated loyalty, Attorney Morrison continued. This represents a disturbing trend in federal law enforcement that prioritizes ethnic profiling over individual assessment. The revelation that her family's heritage was being treated as evidence of potential disloyalty rather than a source of diverse perspectives and capabilities filled Riley with a profound sense of betrayal. The meritocratic ideals that had seemed to guide NASA's initial evaluation of her technical work were being overshadowed by prejudices that reduced her to ethnic stereotypes rather than recognizing her individual achievements. However, the legal consultation also revealed potential avenues for challenging the investigation and protecting Riley's rights. Attorney Morrison had successfully defended other Chinese-American scientists who had been subjected to similar investigations based on ethnic profiling rather than legitimate evidence of wrongdoing. Riley's case is actually quite strong because of the extensive documentation of her independent research and the initial enthusiasm from NASA representatives, Attorney Morrison explained. The government will have difficulty proving that her technical achievements represent security threats when their own aerospace experts have praised her innovations. The decision to fight the investigation rather than simply accepting its consequences represented a fundamental choice about Riley's identity and values. She could attempt to distance herself from her family's heritage and abandon her aerospace interests to avoid further scrutiny, or she could challenge the system that was using ethnic prejudice to deny her opportunities based on merit. "I'm not going to let them destroy my dreams because they're afraid of my last name," Riley declared during a family meeting that evening. "Everything I've achieved has been through my own work and dedication. If they want to investigate me, they can do it openly, instead of sneaking around my workshop in the middle of the night." The public revelation of the federal investigation created a media firestorm that transformed Riley's case into a national controversy about ethnic profiling and national security overreach. Local news outlets that had celebrated her NASA recognition were now covering the investigation as an example of government persecution of talented immigrants and their children. The media attention brought support from unexpected sources, including prominent Chinese-American scientists who had faced similar investigations and civil rights organizations that specialized in defending victims of ethnic profiling. Dr. Lisa Chang, a prominent aerospace engineer who had previously been investigated and cleared of similar accusations, offered to serve as an expert witness in Riley's defense. Riley Chen's case represents everything that's wrong with current federal approaches to national security and scientific research, Dr. Chang explained during a press conference organized by Attorney Morrison. This young woman has achieved remarkable technical innovations through independent research, and she's being punished for her ethnicity rather than rewarded for her capabilities. The growing media coverage also attracted attention from academic institutions and aerospace companies that were concerned about the investigation's impact on scientific research and innovation. Several university engineering departments issued statements supporting Riley and criticizing the federal investigation as an example of ethnic profiling that threatened American technological leadership. MIT's aerospace engineering department released a particularly strong statement defending Riley's qualifications and criticizing the investigation. Ms. Chen's technical achievements represent exactly the kind of innovation and dedication that American aerospace programs need to maintain. Global leadership. The federal investigation appears to be based on ethnic stereotypes rather than legitimate security concerns. The support from MIT was particularly significant because it represented validation from the institution that would have been central to Riley's educational pathway. The university's willingness to publicly defend her suggested that the academic community viewed the investigation as an attack on merit-based evaluation rather than a legitimate national security measure. However, the media attention also attracted criticism from individuals who supported the federal investigation and questioned whether Chinese-American scientists could be trusted with sensitive aerospace technologies. The controversial nature of Riley's case highlighted broader tensions about immigration, ethnic loyalty, and national security that extended far beyond her individual circumstances. The emotional toll of the public controversy was becoming increasingly difficult for Riley and her family to manage. The workshop that had been her private sanctuary was now the subject of national media attention and federal investigation. The technical achievements that had brought her pride and validation were being characterized as potential threats to national security. Riley's relationships with classmates and community members were also affected by the investigation and media coverage. Some individuals expressed support and outrage about her treatment, while others questioned whether the federal concerns might be legitimate. The polarized reactions reflected broader social divisions about immigration and ethnic profiling. Sarah Williams remained supportive, but acknowledged the difficulty of understanding Riley's situation. "I can't imagine what it must feel like to have your dreams destroyed because of your family's background," Sarah said during one of their conversations. "It seems so unfair that your technical abilities don't matter as much as your ethnicity." The investigation's impact on Riley's academic performance was becoming apparent as her senior year progressed. The stress and uncertainty of the federal scrutiny made it difficult to focus on conventional coursework that seemed trivial compared to the life-altering consequences of the investigation. Her grades remained excellent, but her enthusiasm for academic achievement had been dampened by the unclear prospects for her future. Mrs. Sawyer had been working to develop alternative college and career plans that didn't require federal security clearances, but the options seemed inadequate compared to the unprecedented opportunities that NASA had originally offered. The guidance counselor's efforts reflected her recognition that the investigation could permanently alter Riley's educational and career trajectory. "Riley, regardless of how this investigation concludes, you need to have backup plans that don't depend on federal employment or security clearances," Mrs. Sawyer explained. "Your technical capabilities and academic achievements qualify you for numerous opportunities that don't involve government scrutiny. However, the alternative pathways felt like consolation prizes compared to the aerospace career that had seemed within reach just months earlier. The prospect of pursuing conventional engineering education and traditional career advancement seemed like settling for mediocrity after experiencing the validation and acceleration that federal recognition had provided. The legal strategy developed by Attorney Morrison focused on challenging the investigation's legitimacy and demanding transparency about the specific allegations and evidence that had triggered the federal scrutiny. The attorney's approach emphasized Riley's constitutional rights and the discriminatory nature of ethnic profiling in national security investigations. We're demanding that the government either present specific evidence of wrongdoing or terminate this investigation," Attorney Morrison announced during another press conference. Riley Chen has been subjected to months of scrutiny based solely on her ethnicity and technical capabilities, without any indication of actual security violations or criminal activity. The legal challenge attracted support from civil rights organizations and professional associations that were concerned about the investigation's implications for scientific research and ethnic minorities in technical fields. The case was beginning to represent broader issues about discrimination and constitutional rights, rather than simply Riley's individual circumstances. As winter progressed toward spring, Riley found herself caught between despair about her immediate prospects and determination to vindicate her achievements and character. The investigation had transformed her from a celebrated innovator into a national symbol of ethnic profiling and government overreach, but it had also revealed the depth of support for merit-based evaluation and constitutional rights. The workshop that had been violated by federal agents remained her sanctuary for continued technical work, though the creative enthusiasm that had characterized her earlier projects was now overshadowed by anger and determination to prove her critics wrong. The rocket prototypes and documentation that had triggered the investigation continued to represent her capabilities and potential, regardless of bureaucratic obstacles and ethnic prejudice. The stars visible through the barn windows still represented destinations for human exploration and technological achievement, but Riley's relationship with those dreams had been fundamentally altered by her experience with institutional discrimination. The path to aerospace career that had seemed straightforward was now complicated by legal battles and political controversies that had nothing to do with technical merit or personal dedication. The transformation from small-town farm girl to national controversy had occurred with devastating rapidity, demonstrating how quickly individual achievements could be overshadowed by broader social tensions and governmental fears. The validation that Riley had sought for years had been replaced by scrutiny that questioned not only her capabilities, but also her fundamental right to participate in American scientific and technological advancement. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source on a crisp March morning when Dr. Elena Vasquez, director of SpaceX's Advanced Propulsion Research Division, arrived unannounced at the Chen family farm, driving a Tesla Model S that looked distinctly out of place among the agricultural equipment and rural surroundings. Riley was in her workshop, conducting stress tests on a new nozzle design when her father called her to the house, his voice carrying an excitement that had been absent for months during the federal investigation ordeal. "Ms. Chen," Dr. Vasquez said, extending her hand with the confident professionalism that characterized senior aerospace executives, "I'm here because Elon Musk personally directed me to evaluate your technical work after reading about your situation. In the aerospace trade publications, SpaceX has been following your case, and we believe the federal investigation represents a significant loss of talent for American aerospace programs." The mention of Elon Musk's personal interest in her situation sent waves of disbelief and renewed hope through Riley's consciousness. SpaceX represented the cutting edge of commercial aerospace development, and the company's reputation for innovation and merit-based evaluation offered possibilities that seemed immune to the ethnic profiling and bureaucratic obstacles that had destroyed her federal opportunities. Dr. Vasquez explained that SpaceX had been monitoring the federal investigation with growing concern about its implications for aerospace talent acquisition and scientific innovation. The company's leadership viewed Riley's case as an example of how government prejudices could waste exceptional capabilities that America needed to maintain technological leadership in space exploration. SpaceX operates independently of federal security clearance requirements for most of our research and development activities, Dr. Vasquez continued. We evaluate employees based on technical capabilities and innovative potential rather than ethnic background or family heritage. Your hybrid propulsion innovations are exactly the kind of breakthrough thinking that drives our most successful projects. The revelation that SpaceX could offer opportunities without requiring federal security clearances eliminated the bureaucratic obstacles that had made NASA employment impossible. The company's private status and independent funding sources meant that Riley's family background and the ongoing investigation would not affect her eligibility for employment or educational partnerships. Dr. Vasquez had brought a comprehensive evaluation team that included propulsion engineers, materials scientists, and manufacturing specialists who would conduct their own assessment of Riley's technical capabilities. However, unlike the federal evaluation that had been followed by months of investigation and ethnic profiling, SpaceX's assessment focused exclusively on technical merit and innovation potential. Ms. Chen, we'd like to offer you an immediate internship position that would begin this summer, followed by a full scholarship to Caltech's aerospace engineering program with guaranteed employment upon graduation, Dr. Vasquez announced. Additionally, we're prepared to license your hybrid propulsion innovations for development into commercial rocket systems. The comprehensive package exceeded even the original NASA offer in its scope and financial value. The Caltech scholarship eliminated the educational obstacles that had seemed insurmountable, while the guaranteed SpaceX employment provided career security without federal bureaucratic interference. Most importantly, the licensing agreement for her propulsion innovations represented recognition of her technical achievements as genuine intellectual property rather than potential security threats. Riley's parents exchanged glances that reflected their amazement at the dramatic reversal in their daughter's prospects. The federal investigation that had seemed to destroy her aerospace dreams was being rendered irrelevant by private sector recognition of her capabilities and potential contributions to American technological leadership. Dr. Vasquez, this offer seems almost too good to be true, Riley Chen said, her veterinarian's training making her naturally cautious about dramatic promises. What are the specific obligations and expectations that would accompany these opportunities? Dr. Vasquez's response demonstrated SpaceX's straightforward approach to talent acquisition and development. Ms. Chen would be expected to contribute her technical expertise to our propulsion research programs while completing her education. The licensing agreement for her innovations would provide ongoing royalties based on their commercial applications. There are no security clearance requirements or restrictions on family communications. The contrast between SpaceX's merit-based evaluation and the federal investigation's ethnic profiling could not have been more stark. The company's willingness to invest in Riley's capabilities without regard to her family heritage represented the kind of rational assessment that the federal agencies had abandoned in favor of discriminatory prejudices. However, the SpaceX offer also created new challenges that Riley hadn't anticipated. Accepting the company's opportunities would require her to publicly align herself with Elon Musk's organizations during a period when the federal investigation was still ongoing. The decision could potentially escalate her conflict with government agencies while providing protection through private sector employment. The transformation from federal suspect to SpaceX recruit represented more than just career opportunity. Riley's experience demonstrated that individual merit and innovative thinking could overcome institutional prejudice when evaluated by organizations committed to technological advancement rather than ethnic stereotyping. The stars visible through the barn windows no longer seemed distant and inaccessible, separated from her aspirations by bureaucratic obstacles and discriminatory investigations. SpaceX's offer had restored the connection between her technical capabilities and humanity's future among the stars, providing a pathway that valued innovation over conformity and capability over heritage. The choice that lay before Riley would determine not only her individual future, but also her contribution to the broader struggle between merit-based evaluation and ethnic profiling in American aerospace programs. The decision to accept SpaceX's offer would represent a public rejection of federal discrimination and a commitment to pursuing excellence through private sector innovation rather than government employment. The decision that would define Riley's legacy came during a live-streamed press conference on April 15th, exactly 9 months after that first fateful meeting with NASA representatives in the Millfield High School conference room. Standing behind a podium adorned with both SpaceX and legal advocacy logos, Riley faced a room packed with aerospace journalists, civil rights advocates, and federal officials whose investigation had inadvertently created the most watched aerospace recruitment story in decades. 9 months ago, I was a farm girl from Kansas who built rockets in her barn because she dreamed of the stars, Riley began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Today, I'm here to announce that I'm accepting SpaceX's offer to join their advanced propulsion team, not just as vindication of my technical capabilities, but as a stand against the ethnic profiling that has no place in American innovation. The Castius announcement sent immediate shockwaves through the aerospace community. Riley wasn't simply accepting a job offer. She was becoming the face of a movement that challenged how America identified and nurtured scientific talent. Dr. Vasquez stood beside her, representing SpaceX's commitment to merit-based evaluation in an industry too often influenced by bureaucratic prejudices. "But I'm not just joining SpaceX," Riley continued, her confidence building as she addressed the cameras, broadcasting her words to millions of viewers worldwide. "I'm also announcing the Riley Chen Foundation for Young Innovators, funded by the licensing royalties from my hybrid propulsion patents. This foundation will support students from underrepresented communities who demonstrate exceptional technical capabilities, regardless of their family background or ethnic heritage." The foundation announcement transformed Riley's personal victory into a systematic challenge to the barriers that prevented talented young people from pursuing aerospace dreams. The licensing agreement with SpaceX for her propulsion innovations would generate millions of dollars in royalties that could support hundreds of students facing similar obstacles. Attorney Morrison stepped forward to deliver the legal conclusion that had taken months to achieve. Additionally, I'm pleased to announce that the federal investigation into Ms. Chen has been officially terminated with no findings of wrongdoing. The Department of Justice has agreed to implement new guidelines preventing ethnic profiling in security clearance investigations for technical personnel. The legal victory represented more than just Riley's exoneration. It established precedents that would protect future generations of immigrant scientists and engineers from discriminatory investigations. The policy changes represented systemic reforms that addressed the root causes of the ethnic profiling that had nearly destroyed Riley's aerospace dreams. As the press conference concluded, Riley was surrounded by journalists seeking details about her plans and the broader implications of her experience. However, her attention was drawn to a group of high school students who had traveled from across the country to witness her announcement. Their faces reflected the same passion for aerospace engineering that had sustained Riley through years of isolation and months of federal scrutiny. "Ms. Chen," called Maria Santos, a junior from Arizona whose own rocket projects had attracted local attention, What advice do you have for students like us who face obstacles because of our backgrounds? Riley's response came from the heart, reflecting everything she had learned about perseverance, technical excellence, and the importance of staying true to one's dreams despite institutional obstacles. Build something extraordinary. Document everything you do, and never let anyone convince you that your heritage is more important than your capabilities. The stars don't care about your last name or where your parents were born. The months that followed Riley's press conference witnessed unprecedented changes in American aerospace education and employment. The Riley Chen Foundation received applications from over 3,000 students in its first year, while major aerospace companies began implementing diversity initiatives inspired by SpaceX's approach to talent acquisition. Universities reported increased enrollment among underrepresented minorities in engineering programs, with many students citing Riley's example as motivation for pursuing technical careers. Riley's first summer internship at SpaceX exceeded even her most optimistic expectations. Working alongside the engineers developing the next generation of Raptor engines for Starship missions to Mars, she contributed innovations that directly supported humanity's expansion beyond Earth. Her hybrid propulsion research was integrated into small satellite launch systems that reduced costs and increased mission flexibility. The Caltech Aerospace Engineering program provided academic rigor that challenged even Riley's exceptional capabilities. But the combination of theoretical education and practical SpaceX experience accelerated her development beyond traditional educational timelines. Her senior thesis on advanced hybrid propulsion systems attracted attention from aerospace companies worldwide and established her as a leading authority on innovative rocket technologies. By her graduation from Caltech 3 years later, Riley had been promoted to senior propulsion engineer at SpaceX and was leading development teams for Mars mission technologies. The farm girl from Kansas, who had once been investigated as a potential security threat, was now designing the rockets that would carry humans to other planets. The Riley Chen Foundation had grown into a major force in aerospace education, supporting over 500 students annually and establishing partnerships with universities and companies committed to merit-based evaluation. The Foundation's graduates were contributing to aerospace programs at NASA, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and dozens of other organizations that valued innovation over conformity. Riley's wedding to Dr. James Martinez, a fellow propulsion engineer she had met during her Caltech graduate studies, was held at the SpaceX facility in Hawthorne, California, with Elon Musk serving as the officiant and rocket engines, providing a dramatic backdrop for their vows. The ceremony symbolized the integration of personal happiness with professional achievement that had seemed impossible during the darkest days of the federal investigation. Standing in the same barn workshop where her aerospace dreams had begun, now converted into a museum celebrating innovation and perseverance, Riley reflected on the journey that had transformed her from small-town dreamer to aerospace leader. The hybrid rocket prototypes that had attracted both federal suspicion and private sector investment were displayed alongside awards, patents, and photographs documenting her contributions to human space exploration. The stars visible through the barn windows no longer seemed distant and inaccessible. Riley's innovations were literally carrying human dreams toward those destinations, while her foundation was ensuring that future generations of innovators would have opportunities to contribute their own chapters to humanity's expansion among the stars. The transformation from federal suspect to aerospace pioneer demonstrated the power of individual determination combined with institutional support for merit-based evaluation. Riley's experience had exposed the flaws in systems that prioritized ethnic profiling over technical excellence, while proving that authentic innovation could overcome even the most entrenched bureaucratic obstacles. What started with a teenage farm girl building rockets in a Kansas barn had evolved into a movement that was reshaping how America identified, nurtured, and celebrated scientific talent regardless of heritage or background. If Riley's incredible journey from small-town farm girl to aerospace pioneer has inspired you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what dreams you're pursuing despite the obstacles. Her story proves that extraordinary achievements can emerge from the most unexpected places when passion meets perseverance. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we have more amazing stories of people who refuse to let society's limitations define their possibilities. Remember, the stars are waiting for the next generation of dreamers bold enough to reach for them. The summer of 2019 brought scorching heat to Millfield, Kansas, a farming town of barely 3,000 people, where corn stretched endlessly toward horizons that seemed to mock any dreams bigger than the next harvest. 17-year-old Riley Chen had grown accustomed to the rhythm of isolation that defined her life there, spending her mornings helping with farm chores, her afternoons tinkering in the old barn behind her family's modest farmhouse, and her evenings staring at stars that felt impossibly distant. Before we dive into this incredible journey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story amazes you like it did me, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will completely change how you think about small-town dreams and billion-dollar breakthroughs. Riley possessed the kind of restless intelligence that small farming communities often didn't know how to nurture. While her classmates at Millfield High focused on football games, prom planning, and college applications to nearby state schools, Riley spent her free time sketching rocket designs in worn notebooks and conducting chemistry experiments in the converted tool shed that served as her makeshift laboratory. Her parents, David and Riley Chen, had moved to Kansas 15 years earlier when David accepted a position as an agricultural engineer for a large farming cooperative, and Riley found work as the town's only veterinarian. The Chen family had always been different in Millfield. David's expertise in sustainable farming techniques and Riley's advanced veterinary training made them respected professionals. But their daughter's obsession with aerospace engineering struck most locals as impractical, at best and pretentious at worst. In a community where success was measured by crop yields and livestock prices, Riley's dreams of building rockets seemed as foreign as her mixed Chinese-American heritage, in a town that was overwhelmingly white and generationally rooted in agriculture. The old barn that housed Riley's workshop had belonged to the property's previous owners, the Hendersons, who had used it for storing hay and farm equipment before selling to the Chens. Riley had convinced her parents to let her convert half of it into a workspace when she turned 14, promising to maintain her grades and continue helping with household responsibilities. What started as a simple electronics bench had evolved over 3 years into something resembling a miniature aerospace research facility. Hand-built test stands occupied one corner, constructed from salvaged steel beams and repurposed hydraulic components that Riley had obtained through a combination of part-time jobs, birthday money, and creative bartering with local scrap dealers. Mathematical equations covered every available wall surface, written in Riley's precise handwriting and ranging from basic rocket propulsion formulas to complex calculations involving orbital mechanics and fuel efficiency ratios. Shelves lined with carefully labeled containers held chemicals, electronic components, and mechanical parts that Riley had acquired through online purchases, salvage operations, and the occasional sympathetic donation from her father's engineering colleagues. The centerpiece of Riley's workshop was a series of increasingly sophisticated rocket prototypes, each representing months of design work, testing, and refinement. Her earliest attempts had been simple, solid-fuel rockets based on standard model rocket kits, but by her junior year of high school, she was designing and building hybrid propulsion systems that combined solid and liquid fuel components in ways that pushed the boundaries of amateur rocketry. Riley's passion for aerospace engineering had begun during a middle school science fair project about the Mars rovers. While researching the technical specifications of the spacecraft that had successfully landed on the Red Planet, she became fascinated by the engineering challenges involved in designing propulsion systems that could operate reliably in the harsh environment of space. Her initial curiosity had grown into an obsession as she discovered that many of the fundamental principles of rocket design were accessible to dedicated amateurs willing to invest the time and effort necessary to understand the underlying physics and engineering. The isolation of rural Kansas had actually proven advantageous for Riley's rocket experiments. The wide-open farmland surrounding Millfield provided ideal conditions for testing, with plenty of space for launches and minimal risk of property damage or injury to bystanders. Riley had established a formal testing protocol that included safety checks, weather monitoring, and careful documentation of each launch attempt. Her parents had initially been concerned about the safety implications of their daughter's hobby, but Riley's methodical approach and demonstrated competence had gradually earned their trust and support. Local reaction to Riley's aerospace interests ranged from bemused tolerance to outright mockery. Many of her classmates viewed her workshop activities as weird and antisocial, preferring to spend their time on more conventional teenage pursuits. Teachers at Millfield High generally supported Riley's academic achievements, but few understood the sophistication of her independent engineering projects. The town's adults often treated her rocket building as an expensive hobby that would eventually be abandoned when she faced the practical realities of choosing a career and supporting herself. The economic realities of small-town Kansas meant that most of Millfield's young people faced limited options after high school graduation. The lucky ones might attend Kansas State University or the University of Kansas, typically studying agriculture, education, or business administration before returning to work in family farming operations or local businesses. The less fortunate would find employment at the grain elevator, the farm equipment dealership, or one of the few manufacturing plants within driving distance. Dreams of careers in aerospace engineering were generally viewed as impractical fantasies that would inevitably be crushed by economic necessity. Riley's academic performance had always been exceptional, particularly in mathematics and science, courses where she consistently scored at the top of her class. Her SAT scores were high enough to qualify for admission to prestigious engineering schools, but the financial realities of her family's situation made such options seem unrealistic. David's salary as an agricultural engineer was comfortable by Millfield standards, but insufficient to cover the costs of elite private universities or out-of-state tuition at top-tier public institutions. The guidance counselor at Millfield High, Mrs. Patricia Sawyer, had repeatedly encouraged Riley to consider more practical educational paths. During their most recent meeting, Mrs. Sawyer had suggested that Riley's mathematical aptitude would make her an excellent candidate for actuarial science or accounting, fields that offered stable career prospects and reasonable starting salaries. When Riley had mentioned her interest in aerospace engineering, Mrs. Sawyer had gently but firmly explained that such careers required connections and opportunities that simply weren't available to students from small farming communities. The social dynamics of Millfield High reflected the broader community's values and expectations. Popular students were typically those who excelled in athletics, participated in Future Farmers of America, or came from families with established local prominence. Riley's mixed heritage, academic focus, and unusual hobbies placed her firmly outside the mainstream social circles. She had a few close friends who shared her intellectual interests, but she often felt isolated from the social life that seemed to matter so much to her peers. Riley's relationship with her parents was generally positive, though marked by occasional tension over her future plans. David understood his daughter's passion for engineering and secretly admired her technical skills and dedication. He had provided financial support for her workshop activities and occasionally offered advice based on his own engineering background. However, he also worried about Riley's unrealistic expectations and the likelihood that she would face disappointment when her aerospace dreams collided with practical limitations. Lynn shared her husband's concerns, but approached them from a different perspective. As someone who had successfully pursued advanced education and established a professional career in a male-dominated field, she understood the challenges that Riley would face as a young woman seeking to enter aerospace engineering. Lynn had experienced her own share of discrimination and skepticism during veterinary school and her early career, and she worried that Riley's ambitious goals would lead to frustration and disillusionment. The financial pressures facing the Chen family had intensified over the past 2 years as agricultural markets experienced increasing volatility and consolidation. David's employer had implemented several rounds of layoffs and salary freezes, while Lynn's veterinary practice faced competition from larger animal hospitals in nearby cities. The family's modest savings account had been depleted by a series of unexpected expenses, including major repairs to their home's aging HVAC system and Lynn's mother's medical bills during a prolonged illness. Riley was acutely aware of her family's financial constraints and had spent considerable time researching scholarship opportunities and alternative paths to aerospace education. She had applied for numerous merit-based scholarships and had been accepted to several in-state engineering programs that offered reasonable tuition rates. However, the most prestigious aerospace engineering programs remained financially out of reach, and Riley worried that attending a less prestigious school would limit her career opportunities in a highly competitive field. The workshop activities that consumed most of Riley's free time had evolved from simple hobby projects into increasingly sophisticated engineering endeavors. Her most recent rocket design incorporated advanced materials and propulsion concepts that she had discovered through online research and correspondence with amateur rocketry enthusiasts from around the world. The Internet had provided access to technical information and engineering resources that would have been impossible to obtain in pre-digital eras, allowing Riley to pursue her interests despite her geographic isolation. Riley's latest prototype represented the culmination of 3 years of iterative design and testing. The rocket stood nearly 8 feet tall and incorporated a hybrid propulsion system that she had designed from scratch using principles derived from professional aerospace engineering textbooks and research papers. The fuel system used a combination of solid rubber compounds and liquid oxidizers that provided superior performance characteristics compared to traditional amateur rocket designs. The guidance system included electronic components that Riley had programmed herself, using microcontrollers and sensors that provided real-time flight data and basic trajectory correction capabilities. The complexity and sophistication of Riley's rocket designs had begun to attract attention from the amateur rocketry community beyond Millfield. She had been corresponding with several experienced rocket builders who were impressed by her technical knowledge and innovative approaches to common engineering challenges. A few had suggested that Riley's work was approaching professional quality, and that she should consider submitting her designs to technical competitions or academic conferences. However, local reaction to Riley's aerospace activities remained largely dismissive. Many residents of Millfield viewed her workshop projects as expensive toys that demonstrated her family's impractical priorities and Riley's disconnection from community values. The fact that Riley spent more time working on rockets than participating in traditional teenage activities like dating, sports, or part-time jobs reinforced perceptions that she was antisocial and overly focused on unrealistic goals. The upcoming senior year at Millfield High would force Riley to make concrete decisions about her post-graduation plans. College application deadlines were approaching, and scholarship competitions would require her to articulate clear career objectives and demonstrate practical achievements. Riley knew that her rocket-building activities would need to translate into concrete opportunities if her aerospace dreams were to survive the transition from high school to adult responsibilities. As the summer of 2019 progressed toward its conclusion, Riley found herself spending increasing amounts of time in her workshop, driven by a sense of urgency that she couldn't entirely explain. The rocket designs that had begun as expressions of curiosity and creativity were becoming symbols of her determination to transcend the limitations of her circumstances and pursue dreams that seemed impossible to everyone around her. The morning that would change everything began with the familiar sound of Riley's alarm clock piercing the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30 a.m. August had arrived with its typical Kansas intensity, bringing temperatures that would climb past 90 degrees before noon and humidity that made every breath feel thick and oppressive. Riley had developed a routine of conducting her most intensive workshop activities during the early morning hours, when the barn remained relatively cool and her mind felt sharpest after a full night's sleep. As she dressed in her standard workshop, attire of worn jeans, steel-toed boots, and a faded NASA t-shirt that had been a birthday gift from her father, Riley could hear the familiar sounds of farm life beginning around the Chen property. Her father was already in the kitchen, preparing coffee and reviewing weather forecasts on his tablet before heading out to inspect the cornfields that surrounded their home. The agricultural cooperative that employed David had been monitoring crop conditions obsessively as commodity prices fluctuated in response to trade tensions and unpredictable weather patterns. Riley grabbed a quick breakfast of toast and orange juice before heading to the barn, her mind already focused on the day's planned activities. She had scheduled a critical test of her latest propulsion system design, a hybrid rocket motor that represented months of theoretical work and careful component fabrication. The test would determine whether her innovative fuel mixture could achieve the performance characteristics that her calculations predicted, or whether she would need to return to the drawing board for another round of design modifications. The barn felt almost cathedral-like in the early morning light, with dust motes dancing in the golden rays that streamed through the high windows. Riley had installed additional lighting over the years, but she still preferred working during the hours when natural illumination supplemented her artificial lighting systems. The workshop area had evolved into a complex arrangement of workbenches, testing equipment, and storage areas that reflected 3 years of continuous expansion and refinement. Riley began her morning routine by reviewing the previous day's test data and checking the condition of equipment that would be used in the day's experiments. Safety protocols were paramount in her workshop activities, both because of the inherent dangers of working with rocket propulsion systems and because any serious accident would immediately end her parents' tolerance for her aerospace pursuits. She had developed comprehensive checklists for every aspect of her testing procedures, inspired by the safety protocols used by professional aerospace organizations. The hybrid rocket motor that dominated her current attention represented a significant departure from the solid fuel systems that had characterized her earlier work. Hybrid propulsion offered several theoretical advantages, including better performance characteristics, improved safety margins, and greater control over thrust profiles during flight operations. However, designing and building a reliable hybrid system required sophisticated understanding of combustion chemistry, materials science, and precision manufacturing techniques that pushed the boundaries of amateur rocketry. Riley had spent the previous 6 months researching hybrid propulsion systems through online technical resources, correspondence with professional engineers, and careful study of academic papers published by aerospace research institutions. The complexity of the subject matter had required her to develop expertise in areas ranging from thermodynamics to computer-aided design software, skills that she had acquired through online courses and self-directed learning during evening hours and weekends. Her hybrid motor design incorporated several innovative features that distinguished it from conventional amateur rocket systems. The fuel grain was based on a proprietary rubber compound that Riley had formulated through extensive experimentation with different polymer compositions and additives. The oxidizer injection system used precision-machined components that provided precise control over fuel mixture ratios and combustion characteristics. The nozzle design incorporated advanced materials that could withstand the extreme temperatures and pressures generated by the hybrid combustion process. The manufacturing challenges associated with Riley's hybrid motor had required her to develop capabilities that extended far beyond typical amateur workshop activities. She had taught herself precision machining techniques using a combination of online tutorials and hands-on experimentation with borrowed and purchased equipment. The rubber fuel grains were produced using casting techniques that Riley had adapted from industrial manufacturing processes, requiring careful temperature control and timing to achieve consistent results. Component testing had become increasingly sophisticated as Riley's designs grew more complex. Her workshop now included a dedicated test stand capable of measuring thrust, pressure, and temperature characteristics during static firing tests. Data acquisition equipment that she had assembled from electronic components provided real-time monitoring and permanent records of all test activities. The testing protocols that Riley had developed rivaled those used by some professional aerospace organizations in their comprehensiveness and attention to safety considerations.